The house stood at the edge of a red clay road in rural Georgia, its white columns rising from the earth like something that had been placed there deliberately to be seen and never questioned. From the outside, it appeared respectable, even gentle, a family home surrounded by magnolia trees, clean porches, and a fence kept freshly painted. Generations passed by it without stopping, without asking, without imagining what had happened inside its walls. Yet for more than 50 years, that house depended on a system so intimate, so invasive, that it reshaped bodies, families, and futures, while leaving no official record behind. White children were raised there on black milk, and the women who provided it were never meant to be remembered. In the mid-1800s, before the Civil War hardened into inevitability, the Carter estate was known not for its cruelty, but for its order. That reputation mattered. Neighbors spoke of the Carters as civil, God-fearing, and proper. The women of the house were praised for their refinement, their cleanliness, their ability to raise strong children despite the harsh southern climate. What was never mentioned was how those children survived infancy at all. Behind the main house, beyond the manicured hedges and shaded walkways, stood a series of smaller wooden structures where enslaved women lived under a different set of rules, rules that reached directly into their bodies. Wet nursing was not spoken of openly. It didn't need to be. When a white woman gave birth and her milk failed, or when she simply refused the physical burden of nursing, an enslaved woman would be chosen. Sometimes she had recently given birth herself. Sometimes she was forced into pregnancy specifically for that purpose. Her own child, if it survived, would be fed second or not at all. This exchange was never described as violence. It was called necessity. And necessity, in the language of slavery, required no consent. Records from the Carter estate list births, deaths, inventories, and expenses with meticulous care. Horses are named, tools are counted, repairs are noted down to the penny. But the women who fed the household's children appear only as first names, if at all. No acknowledgement of what was taken from them, no mention of the infants who weakened and died because their mothers' bodies were redirected toward another family's survival. Silence was not an accident, it was a feature. One woman, known only as Ruth, appears briefly in an 1847 ledger entry marked "Assigned Indoors Extended." That phrase appears nowhere else. There is no explanation. But church baptism records from the same year show 3 white Carter children baptized within weeks of each other, 2 boys and a girl, despite being born months apart. Medical historians later noted that such clustering often coincided with shared wet nurses, women whose bodies were pushed beyond their limits to keep elite households running smoothly. Ruth disappears from the records 6 months later. There is no death notice, no sale, no transfer, just absence. What happened to Ruth was not unusual. It was simply unremarkable to the people in power. Enslaved women's bodies were treated as renewable resources, capable of endless production, milk, labor, children, without consequence. When they broke down, they were replaced. The Carter family continued. The house remained standing. The road stayed quiet. By the 1850s, the estate had expanded, and with it, the number of children in the main house. Portraits from that era show plump, well-dressed white toddlers with calm expressions and clear skin, the visual markers of health and privilege. What the portraits do not show are the women standing just outside the frame, women who had been woken through the night, whose breasts were raw and infected, whose own children cried from hunger a few feet away. The children in the paintings lived, the others often did not. After emancipation, the story did not end, it transformed. Formerly enslaved women remained nearby, tied to the estate by poverty, lack of options, and social pressure. Wet nursing did not disappear overnight, it simply lost its name. Now it was called help, work, lodging. Black women were still expected to sacrifice their bodies for white families, only now without even the thin legal framework that had once acknowledged their existence. By the early 1900s, the Carter House had become a local landmark. School children passed it on field trips, tour guides praised its architecture. No one spoke of milk, no one spoke of loss. The story that survived was clean because it had been cleaned, scrubbed from the women whose labor could not be displayed with discomfort. Generations grew up believing that what nourished them had come from nowhere, as if privilege itself were self-sustaining. It wasn't until a bundle of personal letters surfaced in a county archive, misfiled, overlooked, written by a white woman who married into the Carter family, that the silence began to crack. In one letter, dated 1872, she wrote plainly, "The children are strong, thanks to Mary. She wept when her own baby weakened, but my mother said this is simply how things must be." There is no apology in the sentence, only acceptance. That acceptance, passed down quietly, is what allowed the system to survive. This is not a story about one house alone. It is about a structure of dependence that shaped the South, built on intimacy without consent and care without reciprocity. It is about how nourishment itself became a site of exploitation. And it is about how history remembers marble columns and forgets the women whose bodies kept them standing. As the years moved forward, the arrangement inside the Georgia house became so normalized that it no longer required explanation. Children were born, fed, raised, and educated without ever being told whose bodies had sustained them in their earliest days. White women spoke casually of good help and strong hands, never naming the intimacy of what that help required. Black women learned to regulate their expressions carefully, never too warm, never too cold, because attachment itself could be punished. To love the child you fed was dangerous. To detach completely was impossible. This tension lived quietly inside the house, shaping daily routines: who entered which rooms, who stood while others sat, who was allowed to touch, and who was never allowed to be seen touching back. At night, when the lamps were low and the house settled into silence, the women who had given their milk often lay awake listening to cries that were not for their own children. Those cries came from upstairs nurseries with lace curtains and polished floors, places they could enter only when summoned. Meanwhile, their own infants slept, or failed to sleep, on straw pallets behind the house, growing thinner as weeks passed. No record marked this imbalance as cruelty. It was simply the order of things. And because it was orderly, because it functioned, it survived unquestioned. By the time emancipation arrived, the damage had already been layered into memory itself. Children raised on black milk grew into adults who genuinely believed they had been cared for kindly, lovingly, without understanding the cost of that care. The women who had fed them carried the weight forward in their bodies, aching chests, weakened health, buried grief, while history moved on, praising the house for its elegance and the family for its stability. What endured was not just a structure of wood and stone, but a model of forgetting so effective that even descendants would struggle to name what had been taken, only sensing that something essential had been quietly drained away and never returned. The Georgia house, particularly dangerous, was not open cruelty, but how carefully everything was framed as kindness. The White family believed, truly believed, that they were benevolent. They spoke of the women who fed their children as if they were fortunate, chosen, even honored. In letters sent to relatives, the lady of the house described the arrangement as mutually sustaining, a phrase that appeared more than once, always without detail. What those words concealed was a system that demanded emotional discipline from the enslaved women while rewarding detachment from the White family. The men of the household rarely entered these conversations directly, yet their authority shaped every outcome. The plantation owner approved which woman would nurse, how long she would remain indoors, and when she would be returned to field or domestic labor. His presence did not need to be constant, it was understood. Decisions about bodies, time, and survival were made quietly, without raised voices, without resistance that could be recorded. This quietness is what allowed the practice to endure across decades. As the children grew older, they began to recognize the women who had fed them not as mothers, but as permanent fixtures, always present, always available, never centered. Some remembered the warmth of arms they were later told not to seek. Others recalled being scolded for showing attachment that crossed invisible boundaries. The Black women, meanwhile, learned to withdraw affection gradually, carefully so as not to provoke discomfort. Love had to be rationed. Care had to look mechanical. Any sign of grief, especially when one of their own children fell ill or died, was treated as disruption. There are no records of punishment for grieving, but there are notes about unproductive days, weak disposition, and unsuitability for indoor work that appear shortly after such losses. Language did the work that violence did not need to do openly. One man appears intermittently in the margins of this story, the plantation overseer. His name surfaces in expense accounts, supply lists, and occasional correspondence. He was responsible for maintaining order, and order included ensuring that nursing women remained physically capable. When illness spread among the enslaved quarters, it was his job to report which women could still perform essential duties. Milk production became a measurement of value. A woman who could no longer provide it lost her protected position inside the house and was sent back outside, regardless of her health. The overseer did not create this system, but he enforced it with efficiency. His role illustrates how exploitation was maintained not by singular villains, but by layers of compliance, each man doing his part, each woman absorbing the consequences. After the war, when legal slavery ended, the house adapted rather than collapsed. Formerly enslaved women were rehired under new terms that changed little in practice. Poverty replaced chains. Dependency replaced ownership. Nursing continued, now framed as employment, though wages were minimal and conditions unchanged. The language softened, but the expectations remained. White families continued to benefit from Black women's bodies while insisting the past was behind them. When asked years later about the women who had lived behind the house, descendants spoke fondly of helpers and nannies, unable or unwilling to explain why so many Black infants from the same families never reached adulthood. By the time historians began examining the record seriously, most of the women were long gone, their stories reduced to fragments, a first name, a crossed-out line, a mention in someone else's letter. What survives instead is the house itself, preserved and photographed, admired for its symmetry and endurance. Visitors stand on its porch and imagine gracious living, never realizing that beneath the floorboards and behind the walls lies a history of nourishment extracted without consent. The Georgia house did not simply raise children, it trained generations to accept benefit without responsibility, care without accountability, and memory without truth. And that, more than anything else, is why it remains standing. Not just as a building, but as a symbol of how deeply exploitation can be woven into everyday life and still be mistaken for normalcy.